In Australia, nuclear power costs more, takes longer, and isn't more reliable. We don't need it. And the sooner we stop pretending that it's viable, the sooner we can actually transition away from fossil fuels. Frustratingly, a lot of our politicians haven't got that memo. So let's have a look at the reasons nuclear power won't work in Australia, and we won't even mention weapons, waste, or accidents. Now, when it comes to picking an energy source, there are two big factors to consider: time and money. We'll start with money. This is the Gen Cost report. It's put out once a year by the CSIRO using data provided by the Australian Energy Market Operator. According to them, the current cost of a new solar plant in Australia is between $44 and $65 per megawatt hour, and the cost of a new wind farm is between $49 and $61 per megawatt hour. By 2030, that drops by about a third, 27 to 56 for solar and 40 to 59 for wind. But what about reliability? What happens when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? The Gen Cost report covers that too. They've taken 9 years of weather data and electricity demand and used that to model how much storage is needed for what is referred to as an energy drought, times when the generation of solar and wind is quite low. With those calculations, they found that even with 90% of the grid being made up of solar and wind, the cost only rises to $61 to $82 per megawatt hour. That covers the renewable generation, plus the cost of installing more interconnectors, synchronous condensers, and battery storage as well. So for nuclear power to be competitive on a cost basis with renewables, $82 is the number it has to beat. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Now there are two types of nuclear power plant: large-scale nuclear, which is already in use all around the world, and small modular nuclear reactors, which are currently in development. Let's start with large-scale. The average cost for nuclear power is 160 Australian dollars per megawatt hour. That average is mostly based on plants which are more than 30 years old, or plants built in China and Russia. If instead we look at the cost to build a new nuclear power plant in a Western country, that price jumps to $250 per megawatt hour. That's 3 times the cost of renewables. No. Alright, what about small modular nuclear reactors? Well, there are a few problems. The main one? They don't exist. At least, not yet. Now, the premise behind this technology is fairly simple. Instead of building one massive nuclear reactor, you build 100 smaller ones. Each smaller reactor is slightly less efficient, but building them on a production line is supposed to significantly reduce the cost. There are a dozen companies attempting this at the moment. Several have detailed designs, a couple are under construction, and 2 already have working reactors, one in China and one in Russia. But at time of recording, none of these are modular. The reactors that exist or are being built are the prototypes or the first of a kind units, not the mass-produced or nth of a kind units, which will apparently be cheaper. So how long until those are available? Well, there are 10 companies that claim they will have a working prototype by 2030. If we assume it takes a decade to get from prototype to mass production, which is a very optimistic time frame by the way, then the absolute earliest we could start installing a small modular reactor is in 2040, 17 years from now. By comparison, building a large-scale solar plant or wind farm with already existing technology takes between 1 and 2 years. And how much will these reactors cost? The original target was $90 per megawatt hour, which is already higher than renewables. But that estimate came from 6 years ago. Since then, at least one company has had to double that target. So even in the best case scenario, small reactors will cost the same and won't be available until a decade after we could have transitioned. It's easy to see, once you run the numbers, that nuclear power just doesn't make sense here. Even with batteries and everything else included, solar and wind is still cheaper and faster in Australia. Now, this doesn't mean nuclear power is always bad. Countries with less real estate or fewer renewable resources will find these equations quite different, and industries like shipping could definitely benefit from the promise of a small modular reactor. But in Australia, this is an excuse to delay action when we already have all the tools we need to fix the problem. And if a politician tells you that nuclear power is a good idea, either they're lying, they're economically illiterate, or they've got an ulterior motive.